You know, we live in a culture that often reduces relationships to transactional dynamics. We hear things like, if you've got money, you've got women, or just focus on the bag and everything else will follow. And while there's some practical truth to the idea that financial stability can be attractive, because it represents competence, responsibility, and self-direction, the deeper truth is this: what most women are secretly craving isn't money, it's emotional presence. That's something no amount of wealth can substitute for. Now, what do I mean by emotional presence? It's the capacity to be there, not just physically, but psychologically, to listen without distraction, to engage without performance, to be fully attentive, grounded, and open. This isn't some abstract feel-good notion. It's deeply rooted in evolutionary psychology and neurobiology. From infancy, we are wired to seek attunement, someone who mirrors us emotionally, who regulates our distress, who connects to us with empathy. Women, in particular, are often more sensitive to emotional nuance. So when a man is emotionally unavailable, even if he's materially generous, she may still feel profoundly alone. Here's the paradox: many men believe that by providing financially, they've fulfilled their duty as a partner. But this isn't the hunter-gatherer world anymore, and women today are not just looking for providers. They're looking for partners who are emotionally intelligent, partners who can offer them not just resources, but resonance. Let me give you a real-world example. A woman might be dating a successful entrepreneur who flies her to luxury destinations, buys her gifts, and floods her life with abundance. But when she tries to open up, when she wants to talk about her fears, her struggles, her emotional wounds, he checks out. He minimizes her feelings, offers quick solutions, or worse, tells her she's being dramatic. And despite all the wealth, she feels unseen, unheard, emotionally neglected, and eventually she disconnects. Why? Because emotional presence is what creates relational safety. It's what tells her, you matter, not because of what you give me, but because I see you, I hear you, I value your internal world. And the moment a woman feels that, really feels it, you begin to access a part of her that no amount of money could ever reach. But let's dig a bit deeper. What makes emotional presence so rare, especially among men? Well, it's not always because they don't care. It's often because they were never taught how to be emotionally present. Many men grew up in environments where emotional expression was shamed, where vulnerability was equated with weakness, where being stoic, detached, and solution-oriented was celebrated, while emotional literacy was dismissed as feminine. And so, by the time they're adults, they're operating from a model of masculinity that leaves them ill-equipped to meet a woman on the level she craves most, her emotional core. And this is where the work begins, not just for men who want better relationships, but for men who want to grow into more integrated, whole human beings. Because when a man learns to be emotionally present, he doesn't just become more attractive to women, he becomes more connected to himself. He becomes less reactive, more grounded, more capable of dealing with life's chaos without being swept away by it. He becomes the calm in the storm, not just for her, but for everyone around him. That kind of man radiates power, not performative power, but authentic strength. And let me say this clearly, emotional presence is not about being soft or weak or passive. It's about strength under control. It's about being fully engaged without being overwhelmed. It's the ability to listen deeply without rushing to fix, to hold space for discomfort without trying to escape it. That's what leadership in a relationship looks like. Women are deeply responsive to this. When they sense that you're not just physically in the room but emotionally available, their nervous system relaxes. They let their guard down, and in that vulnerability, intimacy is born. Not the shallow kind built on attraction or novelty, but the deep, lasting kind rooted in trust. And trust, gentlemen, is the true currency of love. Not money, not status, not even looks, trust. So here's the real takeaway. If you want to be irresistible to a woman, not just in the short term, but in a way that makes her feel safe enough to fall in love with you, learn to be emotionally present. Cultivate self-awareness, practice empathy, listen with your whole body, stop trying to solve everything, and start being with her. In her pain, in her joy, in her confusion. Show her that you're not afraid of her emotional depth, because you've faced your own. That's how you become the kind of man she'll never forget. That's how you create relationships that heal rather than hurt. And in the end, that's worth far more than anything money could ever buy. A great mistake many men make in relationships is confusing status with safety. They assume that by increasing their social standing, by displaying dominance, wealth, or influence, they become more desirable to women. And it's true to a degree. Those traits can be attractive, at least initially. But they don't create connection. They don't create trust. They don't create the kind of psychological safety that forms the bedrock of deep, lasting intimacy. And whether it's spoken or not, that's what women are really craving. The fundamental human need isn't admiration, it's security. It's the feeling that someone has your back, not just when things are easy, but when things get hard. And women, being biologically and socially more attuned to risk, especially emotional risk, are often far more sensitive to subtle cues of safety than men realize. You can have the most expensive car, the highest earning job, the sharpest clothes, and still fail to provide the one thing that truly matters in a relationship, a sense of internal stability. She wants to know that you are a man she can trust with her truth, not just her body, not just her time, but the vulnerable, chaotic, and often unspoken parts of herself. Now, let's not oversimplify this. Status is not meaningless. High-status individuals, whether we're talking about ancient tribal leaders or modern CEOs, tend to display certain traits: competence, decisiveness, problem-solving abilities, resilience. And those are admirable, but the mature masculine doesn't flaunt status. It embodies integrity. It stands still when everything else shakes. And that, ironically, is what builds the kind of status that's worth something. Not the flash, but the foundation. So what does safety actually look like? It's not just physical protection. It's not just financial support. It's emotional containment. It's being the person who doesn't flinch when she's upset. It's resisting the urge to minimize her feelings or fix them too quickly. It's standing firm in the storm, not running from it. When she cries, can you hold the weight of her tears? When she's angry, can you stay grounded instead of retaliating or withdrawing? These are not romantic gestures. These are acts of strength, and a woman will often feel far more secure in your arms during these moments of emotional steadiness than she ever will in a luxury suite. Here's something you probably won't hear in typical dating advice circles. Most women don't leave because you didn't make enough money. They leave because they didn't feel safe enough to be themselves. Over time, if she senses that her emotions are too much for you, if she feels judged, dismissed, or ignored, she starts to shut down. And when a woman shuts down emotionally, even if she stays physically, the relationship is already dying. Because connection thrives in safety, and safety is not built through power, it's built through presence. And let's be honest, a lot of men avoid cultivating emotional safety because it requires them to face their own discomfort. It means sitting with tension instead of fixing it. It means owning your own emotional landscape so you can hold space for hers. It means being willing to admit, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here. That's not weakness. That's humility, and humility is the gateway to growth. A man who has the courage to sit with uncertainty, to remain solid when his ego wants to flee. That man is rare, and that man is remembered. One of the great tragedies of modern masculinity is that many men still equate strength with control. But the truth is, the deepest form of control is self-control, emotional regulation, the ability to stay steady when things get messy. And if you want to be in a healthy relationship with a woman, especially one who is self-aware and emotionally attuned, you need to become a fortress, not a prison. Strong, but not rigid. Grounded, but not closed. That's what makes her feel safe. Think of it this way. Imagine you're walking across a bridge. If it looks fancy but shakes under your feet, you don't trust it. But if it looks humble and holds firm, you feel confident crossing. That's how women experience relationships. Flash may attract attention, but stability earns trust. And when she feels that trust, when she knows you won't crumble the moment she opens up, when she senses you've done your own inner work, that's when she lets herself fall. Not because you dazzled her, but because you held her psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. And that kind of holding can only come from a man who's anchored in something deeper than ego. A man who doesn't need to dominate because he already possesses mastery over himself. That's the kind of man women feel safe with. That's the kind of man women build with. That's the kind of man who doesn't just attract love. He sustains it. So if you're wondering why surface level attraction isn't leading to long-term connection, ask yourself this. Do I make her feel safe? Not just from others, but from me. From my reactions, from my judgments, from my instability. Because if you don't, nothing else will matter. Not your achievements, not your charm, not your ambition. Because women aren't just looking for what you can do. They're paying attention to how you make them feel when they're most unguarded. And that, gentlemen, is where the real work begins. Not in impressing her, but in transforming yourself. In becoming the kind of man who can meet her not just in comfort, but in crisis. Not just in fun, but in fear. Not just when she's beautiful, but when she's broken. There's a subtle illusion that many men fall into when it comes to relationships, and it's this idea that big, dramatic gestures are what win a woman's heart. You've seen it everywhere. Movies, social media, pop culture. The grand apologies, the surprise vacations, the expensive gifts. And while those things have their place, they often serve more as a distraction from what really matters. Because what women actually value, far more than the theatrics, is consistency, predictability, the quiet, steady rhythm of a man who shows up every day, not just in body, but in presence, in effort, in care. And it makes sense when you think about it. Human beings, especially in romantic relationships, are fundamentally pattern recognizers. We don't bond to intentions, we bond to patterns of behavior. A single grand gesture, no matter how impressive, does very little to alter the emotional climate of a relationship. But small, repeated actions, texting good morning, following through on your word, remembering something she said weeks ago, that creates emotional architecture. It builds the invisible scaffolding of trust, and without that, love collapses under its own weight. Here's where many men get stuck. They chase intensity instead of depth. They think passion is what sustains a relationship, but in reality, reliability is what keeps it alive. Women don't fall in love with chaos, at least not in a lasting, sustainable way. They fall in love with how they feel consistently around you. Do they feel safe, cherished, prioritized? not just once in a while, but every time you interact? Do they feel that your words match your actions, not just in moments of crisis, but in the ordinary, mundane fabric of life? Consistency, then, isn't just about behavior, it's about integrity. And integrity isn't flashy. It's not the Instagrammable part of love. It's the part where you show up when you said you would, where you do the hard thing when no one is watching, where you resist the temptation to pull away when emotional intimacy starts to feel uncomfortable. And this is precisely what separates emotionally mature men from those still caught in adolescent fantasies of love. In psychological terms, consistency communicates secure attachment. When a woman experiences your behavior as stable and predictable, her nervous system relaxes. She no longer has to question your motives. She doesn't have to constantly read between the lines. She doesn't have to wonder if you're going to disappear the moment things get difficult. That emotional stability becomes the foundation upon which desire, vulnerability, and long-term connection are built, and it is not created overnight. This is why inconsistency is so damaging. It doesn't just cause confusion, it creates emotional volatility. One day you're attentive, the next day you're distant. One week you're all in, the next week you're evasive. This kind of unpredictability triggers insecurity, and insecurity breeds anxiety, not intimacy. And eventually it breeds resentment, because love, no matter how sincere, cannot survive if it's constantly in question. What's also important to understand is that consistency requires discipline. It demands maturity. Because let's be honest, it's easier to impress someone once than it is to keep showing up, day in and day out, especially when the excitement fades. It's easier to buy a gift than to be emotionally available. It's easier to say I love you than to live it out in the way you treat her when you're stressed, distracted, or frustrated. Consistency isn't about perfection, it's about direction. It's about returning again and again to the kind of man you want to be, especially when it's hard. And here's the paradox: the more consistent you become, the more magnetic you become, not in a loud, attention-grabbing way, but in the kind of way that creates emotional gravity. You become dependable, grounded, trusted, and trust is the currency of love. Once it's there, everything else, desire, intimacy, loyalty, has space to grow. Without it, love becomes an unstable house, always on the verge of collapse. This doesn't mean being boring. This doesn't mean being robotic. It means becoming a man whose presence is reassuring, not because he's predictable in action, but because he's dependable in character. You're not trying to become a clone of yesterday, but a deeper version of yourself every day. A man who listens when it's inconvenient, who stays when it's uncomfortable, who leads not through volume, but through constancy. Women notice this. Even when they don't articulate it, they feel it, and it's often what makes them fall in love, not just with you, but with the version of themselves that feels safe enough to emerge in your presence. She starts to relax into her femininity. She softens, not because you demand it, but because you've created the conditions where that softness is sustainable. Now, if you've struggled with being consistent, don't use this as a weapon against yourself. Many men have never been taught that emotional steadiness is a masculine virtue. Many were taught that chasing excitement and validation was the path to love, but now you know better. And now that you know, you have a choice to become a man who doesn't just ignite passion, but who sustains love through presence, through follow, through being there, even when no one is clapping for you, even when it's quiet. Because in the end, consistency is not about what you do once. it's about who you choose to be over and over again. Let's talk about something that's far less talked about in the usual dating discourse, but it's something women feel in their bones, often long before they even understand it themselves. It's the deep, almost instinctive desire for a man with direction. Not just ambition in the superficial sense, not just goals or hustle or a 5-year plan, but a core orientation in life. A man who knows where he's going. A man who's rooted in values, not just outcomes. Because here's the truth, while money, looks or charm might open doors, it's direction that convinces a woman to walk through one and stay. Now, the philosophical grounding of this goes deep. Human beings, men and women alike, are meaning-seeking creatures, but women, because of their evolutionary attunement to potential consequences, especially in intimacy, tend to be more acutely aware of whether a man is moving through life with purpose or just floating. Is he building something, not necessarily just externally, but internally? Is he becoming someone worth aligning with? You see, without direction, a man is fundamentally chaotic. Not always in appearance. He may hold down a job, he may smile in photos, but underneath there's a subtle drift. He reacts rather than initiates. He chases comfort rather than growth. He avoids rather than confronts. And this lack of psychological orientation over time breeds emotional instability. For a woman, being in the presence of a man like this feels uncertain. She doesn't know if she can rely on him, not because he's unkind, but because he's uncentered, and unconsciously that registers as risk. Now contrast that with a man who has anchored himself to a purpose, even if it's imperfect, even if he hasn't fully arrived. He walks differently, speaks differently. He carries a kind of inner tension, not the anxious kind, but the focused kind. He's not lost in distractions because he's building towards something. He knows his weaknesses and still chooses to confront them. He's not perfect, but he's aiming up, and a woman can feel that. It communicates something primal. You're not going to collapse under pressure. You've built yourself to withstand resistance, and that, right there, is more attractive than any physical trait or financial number. There's also a deeper psychological truth at play. Direction breeds stability, and as we've already explored, stability creates safety. A man with no direction is unstable, not necessarily in an explosive way, but in a disoriented way. His emotions shift according to the mood of the day. His decisions are impulsive. His commitments are shallow, but a man with direction is not easily swayed. He can listen to others without losing himself. He can handle criticism without crumbling. He can love without being consumed, because he's already anchored in something deeper than validation. And this anchoring does something crucial in relationships. It allows a man to lead, not in a domineering or authoritarian way. That's a distortion of leadership, but in a grounded, trustworthy way. He becomes the kind of man who can say, "I've got this," and actually mean it. Not because he knows all the answers, but because he's committed to the process of figuring them out. That kind of leadership is rare, and when a woman feels it, she naturally relaxes. She doesn't have to micromanage. She doesn't have to become the emotional compass of the relationship. She can rest in the knowledge that the man she's with is moving forward and taking her with him, not dragging her along. This is why many you women aren't drawn to the richest man in the room. They're drawn to the man with trajectory. He might not be at the peak yet, but his posture toward life tells a different story. He's not just living for the weekend. He's not numbing himself with distractions. He's building, he's refining, he's learning, And most importantly, he's aligned with something bigger than himself, whether it's a mission, a principle, a vision. That's where his power comes from. You can see this reflected in myth too. In ancient stories, the hero doesn't win the woman by flashing wealth. He wins her by going through trials, by enduring, growing, transforming. The woman represents more than love. She represents alignment, a reward for a man who's become worthy, not because of what he has, but because of who he's become. And that myth still plays out quietly in the emotional worlds of modern relationships. A woman wants to feel like the man she's giving herself to is going somewhere, that he's not stagnant, that he's not afraid to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term meaning. But direction isn't just attractive, it's healing. Because when a woman is with a man who has found direction, she feels less burdened. She no longer has to be the one constantly holding the emotional or psychological line. She can surrender, intellectually, emotionally, even sexually, because she trusts that the man beside her isn't just reacting to life. He's shaping it. And when a woman can trust a man to shape, she stops trying to control. That's when polarity emerges. That's when passion deepens. That's when intimacy becomes transformative. So if you're drifting, if you're living without aim, don't expect a high-quality woman to invest herself fully. Because no woman wants to attach her future to a man who's afraid to confront his own. You don't need to have it all figured out, but you do need to choose a direction, something noble, something difficult, something that demands more from you than what comfort allows. There's something that rarely gets the attention it deserves when we talk about what women really value in a relationship, and that's emotional intelligence, not in the watered-down pop psychology sense of just being nice or understanding feelings, but as a deep, practiced capacity for self-awareness, regulation, empathy, and attunement. When a man lacks this capacity, no amount of money, looks, or status can compensate. Because without emotional intelligence, you're a liability in the emotional economy of a relationship, and that's something no woman with self-respect will invest in for very long. We have to understand this clearly. Women don't want to raise a man emotionally. That's not the kind of leadership they're interested in. And yet, many men still carry an outdated belief that emotional expression is weakness, that sensitivity is a flaw, that vulnerability is a betrayal of masculine identity. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Emotional intelligence is not softness, it's mastery. It's a man's ability to be in control of himself, not by suppressing emotion, but by integrating it, owning it, and expressing it in ways that build rather than destroy. Women notice this immediately. They're biologically and socially conditioned to pick up on emotional signals. It's how they assess safety, maturity, trustworthiness. A man who can remain calm under pressure, who can listen without interrupting, who can validate without feeling threatened. That man is rare, and he is remembered, because in a world full of reactive, emotionally immature men, he stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. But let's not be naive. Emotional intelligence takes work. It requires confronting the uncomfortable truths inside yourself. It demands that you examine your own patterns, your anger, your jealousy, your fear of inadequacy, and not just justify them, but understand them. And that process is difficult. It's humbling. It shatters the ego, but it's necessary because the alternative is living at the mercy of your unconscious wounds. And if you don't learn to work through them, you'll inevitably make the woman you love pay for the pain you refuse to confront. Let's get specific. Imagine a woman opens up to you about something that hurt her. She's emotional, vulnerable, maybe even a little irrational in that moment. An emotionally unintelligent man will feel personally attacked. He'll get defensive. He'll shut down or lash out because he hasn't built the inner space to hold discomfort without being consumed by it. But a man who has cultivated emotional intelligence will do something else. He'll pause. He'll regulate. He'll recognize that her emotions are not a threat to his identity. They're an invitation to understand, to connect, to show that he's capable of meeting her on the level she most needs emotionally. Now, this doesn't mean abandoning logic or self-respect. Emotional intelligence is not about submission. It's about balance. You don't lose your boundaries, you clarify them. You don't ignore your own needs, you express them skillfully. You don't collapse under emotional weight, you carry it with strength. That's what a woman is looking for. Not a man who never gets angry, but a man who knows how to express anger without cruelty. Not a man who never feels fear, but a man who doesn't let fear dictate his values. That's emotional maturity, and it's magnetic. There's a deeper philosophical layer to this, too. If you're not emotionally intelligent, you're not fully conscious. You're being driven by forces you haven't made sense of. Childhood wounds, social programming, repressed shame, and if you won't examine those things, if you won't do the hard inner work to grow past them, then every relationship you enter will eventually be governed by them. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation you've never bothered to inspect. At first, everything looks fine, but eventually the cracks show, and by then the damage is harder to repair. Women don't need you to be perfect. They don't expect you to have no wounds, no struggles. What they're looking for is self-awareness. Can you own your part in a conflict? Can you apologize without shrinking? Can you hold space for someone else's pain without making it about you? These are not small questions. These are the questions that determine whether a relationship can thrive or whether it will quietly corrode beneath the surface. And here's something that might sting. If you constantly find yourself saying, "Women are too emotional," it might be because you haven't developed the strength to meet emotion without fear. And that's not their problem to fix, that's yours. But the beauty is, this is learnable. Emotional intelligence isn't something you either have or don't. It's a skill, a discipline, and like all disciplines, it's forged in struggle. It's built through reflection, mentorship, therapy, reading, accountability. It's not quick and it's not easy, but it's liberating. Because once you begin to understand your inner world, you gain control over it. And once you gain control over it, you can finally offer others something real. Stability, empathy, depth. A woman who senses that you understand yourself deeply is far more likely to trust you with herself. And that's the key, because women don't open up to perfection. They open up to presence, and presence requires emotional intelligence. Without it, everything you build will rest on shaky ground. So ask yourself honestly, have I done the work to understand myself? Or am I still hoping that someone else will do it for me, will carry the weight of my silence, will soothe the parts of me I refuse to face? Because in the end, emotional intelligence is not just about attracting a woman. It's about becoming a man worth being with. And when you do that, when you finally take ownership of your emotional life, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Not because you can hurt her, but because you've proven that you won't. There's one more element, perhaps the most misunderstood of all, that women often value more than money, more than looks, more than any status symbol a man can accumulate. And that's masculine self-respect, a deep, unwavering sense of worth that doesn't rise or fall based on a woman's approval. Because here's the harsh truth. A man who doesn't respect himself will eventually lose the respect of the woman he's trying to impress. At first glance, selfish, self-respect might look like confidence or assertiveness or even arrogance. But the reality is much more nuanced. True self-respect is inner orientation. It's the disciplined refusal to abandon your principles for temporary validation. It's knowing who you are and, more importantly, what you're not willing to be, even when someone you desire puts that to the test. Women instinctively sense whether a man is grounded in this kind of identity, or if he's performing a version of himself he thinks will earn approval. And the moment they realize it's the latter, something essential begins to erode: attraction. This is where many men sabotage themselves, often unconsciously. They start strong, confident, interesting, self-contained, but as they become more emotionally invested, they begin to shift. They start to bend too much, accommodate too quickly, say yes too often. Not because they're generous, but because they're afraid of conflict, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being not enough, and so they try to secure love by being overly agreeable, overly available, overly apologetic. In short, they start to negotiate their value, and that negotiation is where self-respect dies. Now, let's be careful here. This doesn't mean you become rigid or emotionally cold. It doesn't mean you dominate or refuse to compromise. That's not self-respect. That's insecurity dressed up as control. What we're talking about is something more grounded. A man who can say, "I want you, but I don't need you to validate my worth." A man who can walk away, not out of ego, but because he refuses to abandon his integrity just to maintain connection. That's the man who commands respect, not through force, but through clarity. Philosophically, this is rooted in something deeper than mere confidence. It's about the hierarchy of values that govern your life. If your highest value is approval, especially feminine approval, then you will become a slave to the moods and opinions of others. You'll trade your soul for scraps of attention. But if your highest value is truth, integrity, self-mastery, then approval becomes a bonus, not a necessity. And ironically, that's what makes you more attractive. Because you're not chasing love, you're embodying a life that love wants to be a part of. From a psychological perspective, women respond to men who have boundaries, not because they want to be controlled, but because boundaries signal value. When you enforce your standards, you're sending a message. This is who I am. This is what I accept. This is what I walk away from. And that message is powerful. It creates a dynamic of mutual respect rather than dependency, and it liberates both people in the relationship. She doesn't have to carry the burden of leading emotionally, and you don't have to live in fear of her disapproval. Now here's where the challenge comes in. Developing self-respect takes time. It's built in the small, quiet moments when no one is watching, when you choose discipline over indulgence, when you say no to what feels good now in order to build what matters later, when you stop chasing validation and start chasing alignment. And yes, it often means losing people, because when you stop being who they want you to be and start being who you actually are, some people won't like it. But that's the price of freedom, and real men pay it. There's a tragic irony here that many men face. In the process of trying to keep a woman, they lose the very thing that made them attractive in the first place: their strength, their independence, their self-regard. They become so focused on being chosen that they forget to choose themselves, and a woman might stay out of comfort or obligation, but something essential will be missing: desire. Because women don't desire men they can control. They desire men they can respect, and respect begins with how you treat yourself. Do you keep your word to yourself? Do you follow through on your goals even when no one's applauding? Do you speak truth even when it costs you? Do you walk away from situations that insult your dignity? If the answer is no, then the work is not to try harder to impress her, The work is to rebuild yourself from the inside out, not for her, but for the man you could be. And this doesn't just affect romantic relationships. A man without self-respect will struggle in every domain: work, friendships, leadership, because he will always be compromising, always deferring, always shrinking to fit in. And that's no way to live, because you were not designed to be agreeable. You were designed to be truthful, and truth by its very nature draws respect. Even when it's uncomfortable, so ask yourself, what do I tolerate that I shouldn't? What do I sacrifice that I know I need? What do I fear losing that's keeping me from standing tall? Because the answers to those questions will show you exactly where your self-respect has been compromised. But here's the good news: self-respect is recoverable. It begins the moment you stop betraying yourself, the moment you stop performing, the moment you decide that who you are matters more than who others want you to be. And once that shift happens, once you truly respect yourself, you'll find that the right people, the right women, the right opportunities all begin to respond differently to you, not because you changed for them, but because you became someone who never needed to. So walk like you matter, speak